Let's bring you some legal analysis now. Before we get into some of what Julius Malema had to say, I want to bring in Ulrich Roux. He's a legal expert. Ulrich, welcome. On just some of how this verdict has gone. I'm not sure if you were tracking it, and if you were, you would have spent the last 2.5 days glued to your television screen. Have you seen a verdict that has gone into this much detail over a period of 2.5 days almost?
Hi, good morning. Thank you for having me. Yes, certainly I was not able to follow the entire judgment. We had other matters pending, of course. But I did read the news in the evenings, and it certainly seemed as if the magistrate made sure that she reviewed all of the evidence that was led during the trial, and that she covered all of that. I think part of the reason why she did that is because, there most certainly will be an appeal in this matter, and it was to cover herself and to ensure that no stone had been left unturned, and that she evaluated all of the evidence led and ultimately found Julius Malema guilty this morning on all 5 charges that he had faced. So yes, we've been involved in lengthy judgments before. This certainly was a very lengthy judgment, but it's not out of the ordinary. I certainly don't think that the magistrate can be criticized for that. One must look at her findings and her objective findings and then take it from there.
So when you say the magistrate really wanted to make sure that she left no stone unturned, if it was Michelle or Ulrich who was in court on the same charges, do you think it would have gone differently? Do you think that the magistrate knows or had some sense, or that it influenced in any way the length of the judgment, the fact that it is such a highly politicized case?
Well, at the end of the day, any presiding officer, be it a magistrate or a judge, must always remain objective, regardless of who the accused person is and regardless of whether it's a so-called high-profile matter or not. So that is unfortunately only a question which the magistrate herself will be able to answer. But I mean, one must look at previous judgments handed down by her and previous behavior by her in court and in similar matters. So, it is one of those things. I think to speculate on why the judgment was so long and why she, covered every detail, is a sideshow, to be honest with you. One must look at her findings and one must look at the evidence that was led during the trial. And then Julius Malema's legal team must determine whether they feel there are grounds for appeal and whether she did not apply the law correctly and whether she ultimately reached the wrong conclusion. Certainly indications now are that they will be appealing her judgment, but there are numerous things that need to happen before that. He first needs to be sentenced, so the matter has been postponed to 23 January next year for sentencing purposes, and that is a lengthy process in itself. He will have to be assessed by a correctional services supervisor in order to determine whether he's a person who is suitable to be sentenced to jail. And then one can also expect a social worker in private practice to assess him as well. Then all of the factors come into play when sentencing him, such as the seriousness of the offence, his personal circumstances, and of course the impact of his sentencing and what it will have on society at large. So a lot of water that still needs to flow under the bridge in this matter before he is actually sentenced. But for now, he has been found guilty, and any applications for him to appeal this judgment will have to wait until after sentencing has been handed down.
Right. So we know that this case can carry up to 15 years in prison as a sentence, Ulrich. Is there a minimum term that would be applied in a case like this?
Yes, so it does become quite technical because it is alleged that it was a semi-automatic firearm and the illegal discharge and reckless handling of that firearm in a public place. The Minimum Sentences Act is applicable, so the minimum sentence to be handed down is 15 years imprisonment for the offence that he has been convicted of. But if he can show exceptional circumstances which will force the magistrate to deviate from this sentence, then he could most likely face a lighter sentence. Now, various factors need to be taken into account. Was he Was there any risk of anyone being injured as a result of his reckless handling of that firearm? What was the purpose of him handling the firearm in the way that he did? He, of course, his defense was that it was in fact a toy gun, which the magistrate rejected. There was extensive evidence led about the muzzle that and the visible fire that came out of the barrel of the firearm when it was fired off. So that had been rejected, and one now needs to see whether he is going to show true remorse for his behavior and for the crimes that he has been convicted of. That is a large factor that gets taken into account, whether a person is truly remorseful, and whether his legal team will be able to advise him to show remorse, because in a lot of instances, and I think that we can expect this in this matter particularly, he's going to be adamant that he was in fact not guilty and that he did not commit these crimes that he's been convicted of. So how can he show remorse? So, certainly some strategic decisions that are going to have to be taken by both Julius Malema and his legal team. On that note, him now addressing the supporters outside of court and saying that the magistrate is clearly racist and this is just a political conviction, etc. I don't think that's going to count in his favor, unfortunately. And in my view, he would be well advised not to make statements along those lines, because the same magistrate still needs to sentence him and needs to consider all of the factors that are placed before her. Now, I can tell you that the prosecutor in this case most likely will put this speech that he just made now as evidence before the court to show that this man who had just been convicted clearly is not remorseful for his actions, and clearly is a person who needs to be rehabilitated at length, and that is why the minimum sentence of 15 years is applicable. So, some tough decisions that need to be made in the Malema camp at this stage.
And to that point as well, Ulrich, the magistrate also mentioned in her judgment his demeanor in court, particularly when questioned. She mentioned a number of issues. She says he evaded many questions that actually warranted a reply. Pertinent questions remain unanswered. He was asked about a particular scenario, and his answer was, that must have been the Holy Spirit. When asked about how many shots were fired, he says, his answer was, I can't count, I graduated in woodwork. How much would this kind of demeanor count against you in court in any case?
Well, it's just very bad testimony, to be honest. When a person testifies, the court looks at the testimony objectively, and then whether that testimony withstands cross-examination. Now, the purpose of cross-examination is to determine whether a person is indeed telling the truth or not. He did not do himself any favors whatsoever in testifying that it must have been the Holy Spirit who fired off the firearm. It's a ridiculous answer to a valid question, and it shows that he is either attempting to avoid the question or he's just blatantly being dishonest. Now, a court makes a credibility finding on the witnesses and their testimony before the court. We heard the magistrate finding that the ballistics expert's testimony was excellent, and that she accepted his testimony, and that the testimony was not refuted during cross-examination. So in other words, the ballistics expert is found to be credible, whereas Julius Malema's testimony and the answers that you just referred to now and his cross-examination made him out to be an untruthful witness without any credibility. So, purely based on those findings, it is the correct judgment to have found him guilty. And these are certainly things that will come out should the matter go on appeal. An appeal court is bound by the record in the matter. So in other words, all of the testimony that was led during this trial will be placed as is before an appeals court. And the judges in the appeal court will look at this and say, but why did this person who is accused of these crimes answer the questions, which were perfectly valid questions, in an evasive and dishonest manner? And unfortunately, that's not going to do him any favors if he does go on appeal.